build a business that doesn't need investors. When we started building a company that didn't need investors, then all of the investors started coming our way.
I'm actually a little tired of hearing there's no talent in Miami.
And then here you have the guy that built one of the biggest financial services companies of all time. We want to make sure that kids can get that level of exposure here in Miami without having to leave their home the way we did. People are just willing to play dirty. Our focus is to build the most advanced, hyper-intelligent AI in the world of financial services. It's our responsibility, given where we're at in our position in our life and how blessed we've been, to ultimately increase the collective ambition of the community around us. One of the things that we've realized, we're almost 10 years into our career, is
Hey everyone, welcome to Playbook Miami. This is Michael Morgenstern. Super excited to be in Coral Gables today, partnering with Matthew Vega-Sans of Gale. Thanks so much for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I just learned how to pronounce your last name.
Morgenstern's a tough one, that's for sure. I don't respond to Morgenstein. I don't respond to Morgenstern, only Morgenstern. So the purpose of today is to talk a little bit about Gale, a little bit about your founder journey, maybe a little bit about Miami. I've known you for a couple of years now, and I've been watching you from afar, and so I'm really excited to have you here. But I think your story is particularly interesting because you're from Miami. Yeah. I think you were raised on a farm in Kendall, and now you're running an AI company that's scaling really rapidly. So maybe share a little bit about your story, who you are, your Miami journey.
Yeah, so I grew up in, like you mentioned, small farm in an area of Miami called West Kendall, and it couldn't be further from the world of tech. Like growing up, I didn't know anything about tech. In Miami, you're taught that your career could be doctor, lawyer, real estate if you want to have money. I never thought about building anything in tech, and then I got the chance to go to school in Babson, and out there is when I first found the world of tech. And it was funny because it's a school known for entrepreneurship, but I didn't go there for that. I wanted to just work on finance and economics and end up doing Wall Street and eventually private equity. And then when I got to Babson, I finally saw the world of tech, and I thought it was like the most incredible thing ever. I thought it was amazing how I could take an idea in my head, go pay $20 to Gator host to host it, and then I can go build an idea and make money off of it and solve problems for people and do all this cool stuff. And so when I got the opportunity to do that out in Boston, my brother and I started tinkering with some ideas out there. We started our first company, became fairly popular, and we ended up dropping out of college for it. And that was back in 2018. And so we've been doing it now for the last 7 years, and it's been super fun. But I was really blessed to get exposure to the world of tech and all the possibilities of it out in Boston. I was always very frustrated that I had to move to Boston and then spend a lot of time in San Francisco in order to get that exposure. And so that's one of the things, the reason why Mike was my brother, for those listeners, that's the reason why we're so psyched about now that we're in a position in our careers where we kind of have optionality where we could build. We want to do it in Miami so we can bring that exposure to the kids here.
Awesome. So you are building Gale.
Yeah.
You and your brother are building an AI company in the financial services space.
Yeah.
Share a little bit about Gale, share a little about being a founder with your brother, share a little bit about the market and what you guys are up to now.
Yeah, our whole thing is we look at companies like OpenAI and Anthropic and absolutely incredible companies and love what they're building, but if you actually look closer at what they're building general AI for the general world, and anybody that's in a highly regulated industry knows that general technologies do not work well for highly regulated, nuanced, complicated industries. And so that's what we're doing. We're building, and our focus is to build the most advanced, hyper-intelligent AI in the world of financial services, which encompasses things like banking, insurance, finance, and so on. And what we do is we built this super intelligent AI. It's been able to pass the Series 7 exam, been able to pass multiple insurance licensing exams, actuarial exams, and all of that. And now that we have this hyper-intelligent AI, the next question is how do you deploy it? And so we found a way to deploy it through our AI agents that act as frontline employees using phone, text, voice, web chat, soon WhatsApp. And we have our GPT that provides the GPT experience for financial services folks who want to make sure the answers they're getting are hyper accurate, but then also their data is safe. And so that's what we're building. Now, to your second question, what it's like building with my brother, it's fun. I think one of the things that we've realized, we're almost 10 years into our career, is you hear the notion of don't work with friends and family, and looking back on it, I understand why that advice is given, but I'm actually not a fan of it. I always tell people building a business is like going to war. For people who are going to say, oh, you sound hyperbolic, the only people who are going to say are the ones that actually haven't built the business. And so from my perspective, it's like, would I rather go to war with a stranger, or would I rather go to war with somebody I know, love, trust, and I believe doesn't have ulterior motives, that I know what their work habits are? I'm going to choose the latter all day. And so I've loved working with them, and we have other people now we're close to that have been able to join, and I couldn't be more thankful or be having more fun.
I love it. I love it. Yes, it is war.
Yeah.
It's not easy, and going to battle with people that you trust is a huge lift. So within Gale, the customers that you have, the customers you're going after, describe their problems, describe some of the challenges they have, describe who that persona might be, and maybe share a little bit about like what you guys are solving for them.
Yeah, if you look at, it's interesting. The groups that we primarily support today, at least on the AI agents, are a lot of the retail groups. The commercial groups, their ticket prices are still high enough to where their customers are going to want to speak to somebody and whatnot. So they're more customers on the GPT side. Most of our business today on the AI agents, so I'll stay focused on that. The groups, if you think about it on the retail side, they spend anywhere between 20 to 30% of their top line revenue on support and customer acquisition costs.
It's a lot.
And and if you think about those two positions, one of them on the customer acquisition side, they're very much order takers. And so nobody ever wants to, you don't have to sell me insurance, you don't have to sell me a mortgage or anything. You just have to give me the cheapest option, the one that I can afford as a consumer. And so you see a lot of these groups spending that type of money. Then there's a bunch of different problems at play. Then you see over the next decade, there's going to be the great resignation where 50% of frontline employees in the industry is retired. You look at them from a unit economic perspective, they're shrinking on an annual basis. There's a lot of problems, and a lot of them have to do with costs of labor and shrinking margin profile. And so what we do over at Gale is we solve that. You look at the frontline level employees, let's take something like debt collection, or better said, let's do something like account servicing. That traditionally included all benefits, equipment, training, wages. That's typically costing one of these groups $30 per hour as a frontline. With something like Gale, overnight, they can reduce that down to $6 per hour or less. If you look at from an NPS perspective, people always immediately say, okay, but you're gonna make the servicing worse because it's like, no. Now you have an AI that can speak not only whatever language your customer is most comfortable with, but in the dialect that they feel most comfortable in. They could look back to previous conversations. If you know 10 o'clock in the morning is the best time to call everybody or to reach out to folks on text message or whatever, you historically were limited by how many people you had that could call at that time. Now you no longer have that limit, and you can optimize. And so if you look at something like Gale, Gale's 3 times more likely to get somebody on the phone. When it does get somebody on the phone, conversion rates are 30% higher. On the inbound side of things, because it's more human and it's hyper realistic, connect rate for IVRs have historically been sub 25%. With Gale now it's anywhere between 80 and 90% depending on the customer base. And so what do? We help them, one, reduce their cost of operations substantially, but we also help them give superhuman customer service to their customer base. And we now have the data to know that giving that new level of accessibility helps NPS and operational efficiencies go through the roof.
And you're typically working and targeting a specific profile. Is it the head of customer success? Is it in the finance function? Or who are you working with and ultimately selling to? Yeah,
we have a funny approach. We go directly to, even though Gale can do a million different things, one of the things that we found is the worst way to sell AI is to say it can do a million different things, even though everybody knows.
Right.
We start super hyper-focused. And so we'll go to something, like we know the hardest position to just manage is anything that's having to do outbound calls. It's super tough on your employees, churn rates are super high, connect rates are high, all of these different things are high. So we typically target a group or within the organization that has to do outbound calls. And then the reason for that is it's relatively straightforward to get them onboarded for a POC or just to test it really quickly. Call volume is high enough to where they can see the performance rates right away, and then once you get them hooked with that, it's like, oh, by the way, this thing can do 20 other things, and that's where we get them. But whenever we're looking who to hunt, it typically ends up being somebody who has to deal with what a pain in the neck it is to manage a big workforce. That's their morale might be impacted by having to make these tiresome, loathsome calls. And so some days, depending on the group, it might be the debt collection department. Some days it might be the SDR leader. It really depends on the group, but it's typically a group that's doing a lot of outbound calls.
And your approach is servicing and giving AI in a highly regulated, heavy compliance industry. What are some of the lessons that you're seeing in compliance in this regulated industry as it relates to Gale and Gail AI?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I'd say, and one is, the biggest thing that surprises is how many groups are coming out and saying they're SOC 2 and ISO compliant and all of that different stuff, and in reality they're not. And so you look at a lot of these groups, they say, actually pay attention to a lot of their websites, they say they have the sticker that to everybody at quick glance is like SOC 2 compliance or ISO or whatever. It actually says SOC 2 adherence. They haven't gone through the process. So that's been a surprise how many people are just willing to play dirty, and so you kind of have to be ready to play against that. I think the other thing too is if you're selling to financial institutions, SOC 2, I mean you guys know this at Brex, SOC 2 and ISO are gonna barely even get you through the door. You have to start worrying about things like what time zone is my cloud stuff being operated in? What are my SLAs going to look like? How do they want their data? Do I have to give it? Do I have to make it available on-prem? Do I have to make it available elsewhere? Like, there's so many different things that people don't take into account. And if you've never worked in a highly regulated industry like this, you don't know what you don't know, and so it's very hard to support them. I think the other thing is just like probably the biggest learning has been, if you're working with a European group, you even have to adhere to the European standards, even if you're not touching the data of any European customers. And so there's just so many different things like that. And then even like, because we do a lot of stuff on the voice, like we had to learn a lot about the laws of wiretapping and all of that stuff. So it's insane the broadness of what you have to learn. I mean, even things on like on outreach, like I can tell you right now, I had to learn debt collection law and how the rights of a consumer are transferred when somebody buys debt from another group. I mean, there's so many different things to learn about it, not just from an enterprise perspective, but as an industry as a whole.
So you're building and growing very fast.
Yeah.
I think you're here in Coral Gables in Miami.
Yeah.
How many employees do you have right now?
24 employees.
24 employees. And how do you run your operation here with 24 employees? You know, what is it like, the culture? You know, I think I met a few interns earlier. They were super cool. But like, how do you want to scale Gale AI from a culture perspective, employee perspective, and what kind of vibe you want to create around this office?
I think the biggest thing that we want is my brother and I approach culture this time around basically as a product. I think one of the things that we learned over time was when we looked back at all the successes that we had typically had a lot of success when we were building for ourselves, and then we often had a lot of failures when we were building for others, even from like a product perspective. And so for the last 10 years, we had built businesses, and even though we had a lot of successes, we looked back and there were admittedly a lot of things from a culture perspective we could have done differently to have made it better. I think this time around, before we ever started hiring people again, we did this time around all the cheesy stuff, like what's your mission going to be, what type of culture do you want, and it's ultimately ended up being the best thing we could have done. We ultimately approached culture this time around like it was a product. We said, all right, if culture was a product, what type of culture, what type of product will we build for ourselves? Now let's go find a bunch of other maniacs that want that same product or want that same culture. And so this time around, we did stuff that, like, it's a very hardcore culture. We found people that we would never have to ask to be in office. We found people that we would never have to ask to work certain hours and get certain amount of things done. Like, you come here on the weekend, you're gonna see people here. You come here at 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning some days, you're gonna see people here. You see people at midnight here. And so we did a really good job finding a bunch of people that just love to work hard, have fun. But I think this time around too, we also just made sure to invest much more in the people. Like, the office that we have is it's a beautiful, very comfortable office for a reason. We made sure even to think about location. There's a million restaurants nearby. We made sure to think about like proximity to the highway so that people can get on and off. We thought about even things like, all right, what type of perks are we going to be offering? If you stay after a certain hour, we'll pay for food, we'll pay for the Ubers. Even things like, we'll be implementing it. We're going to have an additional living stipend if you live within a certain proximity of the office, because it is a relatively expensive zip code, and so we'll be able to help you with that too. So for us, one of the things that once we started thinking about it more as a product, we realized, hey, what goes into a great product? It's a product that makes life easier for people. It's a product that actually improves the quality of life. It's a product that adds a lot of value. And so we started approaching culture the same thing. How could we build a culture that actually adds to people's life? It doesn't feel like their job is taken from them. How can we make it so that they want to, the way you, when you get a new product you're excited about, you want to show everybody, how can we build a company where people are excited to show their friends that they work at here and stuff? And so this time around, we approached it like a product, and I think you talk to anybody that's known Michael and I now for a few years, this is by far the best culture we built, and I think it has a lot to do because of that intentionality.
It's super intentional, it's super thorough thinking, and the office is sick. You should do a walkthrough at some point here. So you're a product of Miami. You shared a little about the Kendall farm growing up. You are probably one of my most favorite ambitious founders, not only here, but in the market. Why Miami? Why do you want to stay in Miami? Talk to me about a little bit how you see Miami developing, specifically in your field, right? You're an AI, you're a startup founder, you're a tech founder, you've raised some venture capital, might raise some more. Why Miami versus San Francisco or New York for you maybe?
I think there's a couple of different reasons. I think one, and this is getting more philosophical, but like I'm a fairly religious guy. I think if you look at my life, God could have given these opportunities to anybody else. I think I was very blessed. I've been the guy he picked. And so for me, I think the best thing that I can do I think the best way to thank God and the universe, if that's what you believe in, is to ultimately fulfill your potential and to help those around you fulfill their potential too. I think when I look at Miami, I think Miami has a lot of incredible talent and a lot of people that want more out of their life. They just don't know how to get that. And when I look at Boston, I look at San Francisco, Miami has the same talent. We just don't have the same level of ambition. And when I say that, it irks some people because they're like, oh, we're ambitious. We want to make money. We want to be successful. Like, no, it's completely different. When we're ambitious in Miami, we think about, oh man, we can build a nice life to go to get a nice boat or take care of our parents. And those are great things. But in San Francisco, ambitious is you have 7th graders out there talking about putting rockets on Mars. In Boston, because they're in close proximity to things like IBM, you have middle schoolers and high schoolers building robotic arms and fake dogs that are going to be used by the Army and stuff. It's a different level of ambition, and I think that's why you see a completely different level of success when it comes to building these new companies and stuff. I think right now we're at an interesting point in Miami where you're starting to see this influx of capital. And so for the first time ever, if there is somebody who has those crazy ambitious ideas, you now have the capital providers for it. And so like my brother always says, it's our responsibility, given where we're at in our position in our life and how blessed we've been, to ultimately increase the collective ambition of the community around us. And so that's one of the reasons why we're here. We want to make sure that kids can get that level of exposure here in Miami without having to leave their home the way we did. I think the other thing too is just, I think it's a competitive advantage. And so right now we're operating in 10 countries. The only reason why we can do that is because we're in Miami. I have a 2-hour flight to New York, a direct flight to the Bay Area, but if I have to go to another country, I have a direct flight to all those places too. And so it's a certain level of accessibility that you almost don't get anywhere. And so Miami has just so many things. I think the last thing that I'll say too is we don't have an echo chamber here. And so I think one of the things that happened in San Francisco and the Bay Area, and a little bit even New York, everybody's so attuned to what the latest technology trends are, you oftentimes end up building for them, which is why you see these companies that pop off in the valley and then they don't grow beyond that. I think one of the things that we're forced to do is we're forced to realize there's another world beyond Silicon Valley, and we're forced to build for those people. I do this exercise whenever we bring on a new employee. We'll take them out to a celebratory meal, typically at one of the Cuban restaurants nearby, and at like 10 o'clock after everything's dead, I take them down Bird Road or Miller, and I have them look at every single one of the strip malls there. And if you get off any of the strip malls, you're gonna notice that every single one of them has 3 things. It has an insurance agency, a financial advisor, and either like a tax planner or real estate. It never fails, it has those 3. And I tell them all the time, as much as we wanna build for the big Fortune 100 companies and Windows and all of that, there's 500,000 of these businesses around. And if you can build in a way that they could use Gale without us being in the room to set it up for them, you'll have built a generational business that will have impacted a bunch of lives. And you don't get that perspective elsewhere. And it sounds trivial, but there's so much that you can learn from just walking up to the windows of a business and seeing the way their seats are set up, seeing the type of people, seeing the pictures of the families on the desk. And that actually goes a lot into the way we build product. And so I think that is something that's very unique in Miami, because I wouldn't have that in the Valley where everything is so techy. I think even having that perspective of people outside our echo chamber is a massive competitive advantage too.
100% agree, and I think it is the real world here in many ways. I mean, it's different socioeconomic, not everything is 100%. AI, not everything is tech. And so talent-wise, because I think we obviously have great founders in Miami, you and your brother. There's plenty of great companies that are now scaling like Gale. How do you think about talent? Are you recruiting early people from different schools? I think you have some interesting talent stories potentially. So I'd love to hear about, that's usually the biggest detractor is talent in Miami.
Yeah, I think Miami's talent's really interesting. I think one, if you're one of the few companies here, look, like everybody loves to say, oh, there's so much talent in Silicon Valley, and don't get me wrong, there is, but it's very hard as a startup that's raised tens of millions of dollars to beat out the OpenAIs, the Scale AIs, the Anthropics, and all those companies that are out there. So even though you as a startup might want to tell yourself, I can go recruit a bunch of great people, the competition is brutal out there. And so even though you might theoretically have access to a lot of talent out there, you in reality don't have access to all that talent out there. I think here in Miami, it's a little bit different. There's not nearly as much competition. And so if you're one of the few companies that is building, you can almost build a monopoly for talent for a much lower price. And so for me, I actually think about it as an arbitrage opportunity. I think the other thing too is you also have these schools like FIU, UM, even a Miami-Dade college in the UFs all around the state of Florida. There's a lot of kids that had the grades and had the capabilities to go to something like an MIT or Carnegie Mellon or whatever, and for whatever reason, they may not have had it. Like, I know a guy fairly well, got into the MIT, Carnegie Mellon, Georgia Tech, ended up going to FIU because his mom got cancer and he had to stay. And there's a lot more people out there that are in similar stories like that than you would imagine, and they typically get written off because they went to a school like FIU. And so if you're one of the businesses that actually pays attention to that, they catch on, their buddies catch on, word gets around, and so you end up getting a pretty unique group of people without having to compete with everything like you do in Silicon Valley. And so we found that to be pretty much the case. Like my brother right now is in UF recruiting, and then I'll be in Georgia Tech in the next couple of weeks doing the same thing. And so I think there's a massive opportunity to build a monopoly of talent down here, and these students are catching on to who's paying attention to them and who isn't. And so that's on the tech side. I think on the business side, this is really where Miami's proximity to the Hispanic or international community actually benefits a lot. In Silicon Valley, you have this culture of spend without necessarily looking at the bottom line. With these people in Miami, even if they're first generation Americans like me that were born here, I still had to grow up listening to the stories of the entrepreneurs in my family and the way they had to pay attention to bottom line and pay attention to CAC and payback and all that. So for me, it almost feels weird to expend irresponsibly, and most people in Miami are around that too. So here you have a bunch of really good operators that not only can compete and operate at the highest levels, but they're actually able to do it in a really capital efficient manner because they have that immigrant touch, because they have that immigrant blood or that underdog blood. And so I think from a business perspective, you find talent here that stacks up anywhere else and has the added benefit of watching the cost a little bit more because the Miami culture is not as big spend when it comes to business. Personal is different. Personal is different. And then on the engineering side, you do have the ability to almost create a monopoly for talent because if you're one of the few well-funded AI companies or just tech companies here in general, you really aren't competing with anybody.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that there is homegrown talent.
Yeah.
You have, if you speak different languages,
100%.
You're going to be great talent. So I think it's just like recruiting aperture needs to open up. Mm-hmm. And I'm actually a little tired of hearing there's no talent in Miami because I feel like there's great talent.
I think it's ridiculous. I mean, I'll give like the guy that I look up to that did it, I think, incredibly well is Dan Gilbert out in Detroit. Like everybody in Detroit was, everybody always looked at Detroit as either like Motown music and then maybe the auto manufacturing. And then here you have the guy that built one of the biggest financial services companies of all time. The guy himself is his net worth is he's a walking business by himself. And so I look at a guy like that. He went to a place like Detroit. Nobody thinks of as a big financial hub, and the guy built one of the most generational businesses. I think they have $3 or $4 trillion in mortgages under management right now. And so that's Michael and I view the opportunity right now in Miami as the opportunity to do the same thing. If nobody else wants to pay attention to Miami, we will. We know what's down here, and I think we have an opportunity to do something similar to what Dan Gilbert did in Detroit. And I think we're very blessed that right now you have so much capital coming into Miami that if you're one of the few people that are building, then you almost, again, you have a monopoly on attention there as well, because folks want to invest in Miami, and then if there's not too many options, well, you kind of get to be the belle of the ball. And so, yeah, I mean, people said the same thing about Detroit, and those people saying they have never built I guess now their market cap is $40 billion mortgage company. And I guess they did that without talent. And so I think we have an opportunity to create something here.
That is a great analogy. Dan Gilbert's a beast. And
absolutely,
it's a great mentor to have and someone to follow and try to assume that. Let's just switch a little bit to fundraising. I think a lot of founders will probably listen to this. You've fundraised, you know how to fundraise. If you had a paragraph on how founders should think about dealing with investors when they go to market, what would you typically advise? Obviously, everyone is different. Every company is different, but is there a standard advice that you give?
I think the biggest thing for me is, like for those listening, I'll give you guys a quick background on my brother and I's story. My brother and I got into the startup world in 2016, and for the first 5 years of our journey, struggled quite a bit to raise capital. And we actually had some pretty interesting business traction. So for our first company, our app went viral, became top 100 app in the App Store in 7 days, grew it to tens of thousands of users and stuff. And even those sexy vanity metrics didn't get a lot of love from investors. At one point, we had to send 526 emails to get our first yes. And so probably hold the record for most rejections. Got rejected by Y Combinator like 6 times and whatnot. And then in 2021, we finally started getting success with investors, and then now to date have raised like 60 million. I think the biggest piece of advice I can give is build a business that doesn't need investors. Those first few years when we were naive, when we were first getting into the world of tech, I'd see all this stuff on Shark Tank, I'd see the TechCrunch headlines, I'd see all this stuff, and I immediately thought, I have to build to appease investors. And so I'd try to get X number of users, and then when I would get that number of users and I couldn't get the investors, it would really frustrate me. So I think, and then when COVID hits, my brother and I started building a business that doesn't need investors. Like we landed a massive contract before we even ever had anything. And when we started building a company that didn't need investors, then all of the investors started coming our way. I think at our Series A, we had 40 something firms that were trying to reach out to us. 12 months before that, we had negative $2,800 in the bank account. For our Series B on that previous business, we had 130 firms reach out to us purely organically within 30 days. And then even now, this new business that we're doing, we've been very stealthy about it. And we've had every single firm you could imagine that's reached out to us to talk about either preempting our A or in the past joining our seed and stuff. And so that's, I think, the best piece of advice I can say is build a business that doesn't need investors. And then when you do speak to investors, everybody there is just showing up with a pitch deck that just says ARR. Nobody is showing up with what's my payback cycle going to look like, what's my CAC, what's all of that. And so if you're fundraising, you're better off just saying, F it, for 3 months, I'm just going to get these business metrics. I'm going to get my CAC, my payback cycle, my gross margin profile, and obviously my top line, and then my average contract value. If you show up to an investor meeting and you tell them, hey, we're trying to raise $5 million, here's what my CAC has been for the last 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months. If you give me $5 million, I'll spend $3 million on CAC, and then this is where it's going to get us from a revenue perspective. That alone is going to give you a completely different conversation with investors. And so I'd say like the first one is build a company that doesn't need investors and watch them all flock. And the second one is going to be know your metrics. And the third, because somebody's going to ask, oh, Matthew, what if I don't have money to build the app that I need? Replit, Vercel, those all exist, and they've taken away your excuse to not be able to build at least a functioning prototype.
So it's never been easier to be an entrepreneur?
Never been easier.
I love it.
If you can't build now, Lord help you, you're just making excuses.
We don't like excuses. We're in action mode for
Exactly.
sure.
The last thing I'll say too is I hear all the time people say like, oh, there should be more entrepreneurs. There should be. I was like, I'm like, no, there shouldn't. There's as many entrepreneurs as needed, because if you're not an entrepreneur in today's day and age, you probably shouldn't be. Now, there's of course exceptions. If you have somebody ill in your family, then yeah, like that, I completely understand. Or if you have kids or whatever, but there's probably around the right amount of entrepreneurs that deserve to be entrepreneurs.
I think that's fair. There's probably too many venture capital investors that don't deserve to be venture capital investors, maybe.
100%.
So as we close up, I think this is really interesting. Let's just go over the big, hairy, audacious goal for Gale.
Yeah.
Maybe just pitch the camera or go into it. Like, what is the BHAG for you guys? How do you guys want to take over the market? Where do you see yourself in a couple years?
I think my long-term goal is, I do believe that we're gonna eventually become a multi-planetary species because of guys like Elon and Bezos, and so somebody's gonna have to build the pipes that makes financial services available all around the solar system, and so I think that's gonna be us. Now, I think we get a nice practice round. We practice getting there, or we get there by practicing on Earth, and so I think if you look at financial services as a whole, everybody would agree the system's relatively broken. And it's amazing to me that nobody's trying to focus on fixing it. And so I think from our perspective, we want to do that. I think our long-term goal is, if I had to say it in one word, or in one phrase, I want to make financial services available to every human in the universe. I'm an affirmative believer that access to even something like insurance makes life infinitely better. Try to go get a mortgage without insurance. Try to go get a car without insurance. Try to go get medicine. Try to do whatever. Financial services makes life far more livable. It helps everybody fulfill their potential in ways they never thought imaginable. And so we want to build the systems that ultimately make financial services available to everybody. Whether you want to actually purchase that financial service is a completely different story, but we want to make it ultimately available to everybody. And so I think Gale allows us to do that, because now, let's say you wanted to offer financial services in a part of a third world country where maybe you just didn't have the resources to have insurance agents or mortgage brokers or whatever. Now you have the technology that can talk to those people, walk them through and all of that. So that's our long-term goal. I think more near-term, over the next couple of years, our goal is to make sure that every professional in financial services is no longer using generic AI. We want all of them to use safe, hyper-intelligent AI trained on their industry. And so that's what we want to do over the next 3 to 5 years. We always say we're trying to build a business that's around the next 100,000 days. And so next 100,000 days, that's where we want to build something that can make financial services available to everybody.
I love it. Yeah. And so just to close up, the website is?
meetgale.com.
You're based in Coral Gables.
Coral Gables.
You're planning on staying in Miami?
We will always have our headquarters in Miami. We'll eventually be multi-planetary company, but and have offices all over, but Miami's gonna always be the headquarters.
I'm looking forward to supporting you, Matthew. Thanks so much for today.
Appreciate it.
Pleasure, man.